The wind tore across the plains like a living thing, shrieking to the cottonwoods and clawing at the snow. A woman stumbled through it, her arms spread wide, her shawl in tatters, trying to shield her children from the storm and from the men behind her. 3 little ones clung to her skirt, their dark eyes wide with confusion and terror. The mother's lips were cracked, her breath steaming in the frozen air. Her name was Lynn, though none of the men shouting insults knew it. To them, she was just the Chinawoman, a target to blame for hunger, for lost wages, for the changing world that frightened them more than the cold ever could. The mob's torches hissed in the wind, orange flares against the endless white. "Ain't no place for your kind here," one man bellowed. Lynn's eldest, a boy barely 10, tried to face them, but she pushed behind her, whispering something in their language. Words of protection, words that trembled. The whip cracked, slicing through the air like lightning. The sound made even the storm hesitate. She took the first lash across her shoulder, then another, biting her lip until blood ran down her chin. The children screamed, but she didn't let go. She dropped to her knees, arms still spread, body shaking but unbroken. The men laughed, their voices harsh and ugly, swallowed by the storm's roar. "Teach her to kneel proper," another shouted. The whip fell again, cruel and precise. Each strike echoed through the valley, swallowed by the snow but never lost. Lynn didn't beg. She turned her face toward her children and whispered, "Close your eyes." The youngest buried his face in her skirts, sobbing. The snow thickened, flakes clinging to their hair, their lashes, their wounds. The fire from the torches sputtered in the wind, and still they didn't stop. When at last the men tired of their cruelty, they left her there, bleeding, trembling, her arms frozen around her children. One spat into the snow before riding off, muttering, "Let the storm finish what we started." Silence returned. Only the sound of wind moving through pines remained. Lynn tried to move, but her body no longer obeyed. Her vision blurred, the world reduced to white and shadow. She pressed her cheek to the snow beside her daughter's face. "It's all right," she whispered, though her voice was barely sound. The little girl's lips moved, but no words came. The cold crept deeper, gentle and merciless. Lynn closed her eyes, praying the tongue of her ancestors, praying that if death came, it would be kind to her children. Far off, a horse's hooves broke the quiet. The sound came slow and heavy, each step crunching through the snow. A figure emerged from the haze, a man wrapped in a bearskin coat, his beard rimed with frost, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a wet hat. He dismounted and stood for a long moment, looking at the scene before him. The mother's limp form, the children huddled against her, the blood blackening in the snow. His jaw tightened. He knelt beside them, gloved hands moving with unexpected care. One child stirred, letting out a weak cry. He felt for the woman's pulse. It flickered faintly beneath his fingers. "Easy now," he murmured, voice rough from disuse. He took off his coat, wrapping it around the children, then lifted the mother into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her head lolled against his shoulder, hair stiff with frost. The man hesitated only once, scanning the empty hills. Somewhere beyond them, he thought he saw a torchlight fading into the trees. He muttered a curse under his breath, then started walking, dragging his horse behind him. The storm thickened as night fell. His breath came in clouds. The trail to his cabin cut through pines heavy with ice. Once, he slipped on a patch of frozen ground, nearly losing his grip on the mother, but he held fast. He spoke to her though she couldn't hear, small, meaningless things. "You hang on now. Ain't far. Just keep breathing." Her face brushed his neck, skin cold as stone. When he reached the ridge, his cabin came into view, a lonely shape huddled beneath a snow-covered roof, smoke barely curling from his chimney. He pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped into the dim interior. Inside, the air smelled of pine pitch and iron. He laid the mother on a pallet near the hearth and pulled the children close to the fire. They were too cold to cry, eyes glassy with shock. He worked quickly, throwing it on the flames, filling a pot with snow to melt, tearing his own shirt into strips for bandages. The fire roared to life, sending shadows leaping along the log walls. He poured whiskey over a cloth and began cleaning her wounds. She flinched even in her unconsciousness, a tremor passing through her whole body. "Sorry," he muttered. "Sorry, ma'am. Gotta keep you from fever." He worked until his hands were numb. When the bleeding stopped, he covered her with every blanket he owned. The children fell asleep by the fire, curled together beneath his coat. He sat back on his heels, staring into the flames. His name was Daniel, though he hadn't heard anyone speak it in months. He lived here by choice, away from towns, away from men who thought cruelty was law. But looking at the woman's bruised face, he felt something stir in him that he thought long dead. He saw the mark of a whip across her cheek and looked away, his throat tight. Outside, the storm howled harder. Snow beat against the shutters like desperate fists. He poured a cup of black coffee, sat by the fire, and watched her chest rise and fall. Once, her hand moved as if searching for someone. He took it gently, placing it back beneath the blanket. Her skin was cool, but no longer freezing. Hours passed. The fire dimmed, the cabin breathing with its own rhythm. The crack of wood, the sigh of wind through chinks. Daniel leaned against the wall, exhaustion pulling at him. Before sleep took him, he looked at the woman again and whispered, "You're safe now. Ain't nobody gonna lay another whip on you." When morning came, the storm had eased. Sunlight spilled through the frost-coated window, scattering gold across the room. The children stirred first, whispering softly to one another. The mother's eyes opened at last, dark and dazed. She saw him sitting near the fire, cleaning his rifle. For a moment, fear flared in her gaze, but then she noticed her children asleep beside her. Safe, warm. Daniel looked up, met her eyes, and gave a single nod. "You made it through the night," he said quietly. "That's a start." Her lips parted, the words slow, uncertain. "Why help us?" He shrugged, staring into the fire. "Because no one helped me when I needed it." Outside, the snow began to melt in thin streams down the slope, sunlight glittering on every drop. Inside, warmth spread from the hearth outward, reaching them both. She turned her gaze toward the window, toward that light, and whispered something in her language, a prayer, or maybe a thank you. Daniel didn't understand the words, but he understood their weight. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. Their fingers brushed, and for the first time since the storm began, she smiled. Faint, but real. He said nothing more. The world outside remained cold and cruel, but inside that small cabin, the fire kept burning. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt like it had a reason to. The morning after the storm carried a strange calm. Sunlight fell in thin, silvery blades through the cabin's narrow window, glinting on the steam rising from the kettle. Daniel stood by the hearth, stirring a pot of thin oatmeal, his movements slow, measured. Behind him, the 3 children sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes darting between the fire and their mother. Lynn's back rested against a stack of folded blankets. Her face was pale, lips cracked, but color had begun to return to her cheeks. When she tried to sit up, Daniel moved to steady her, his callous hand hovering at her shoulder. She hesitated at his touch, then nodded a quiet thanks. The space between them was heavy with silence, broken only by the gentle hiss of the boiling water. "Eat," he said simply, setting a bowl before her. The smell of oats and smoke filled the air. The children devoured their portions, barely breathing between spoonfuls. Lynn lifted hers more slowly, wincing each time her arms moved. Daniel noticed the way she glanced at him, cautious, as if still uncertain whether the safety was real. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but sure. "You live here alone?" He nodded. "Long time." She looked around the cabin. Bare walls, tools lined with care, the air thick with the scent of pine and ash. "No one comes?" she asked. "Not if they value their peace," he said. Something in his tone made her believe him. The days began to blur into a quiet rhythm. Daniel mended the roof where the snow had torn through, while Lynn washed what few clothes they had and learned to keep the fire steady. The children, quick to adapt, followed him outside, fascinated by his tools and traps. He showed them how to split kindling, how to listen for the distant call of a coyote before nightfall. In return, They showed him something of their own world. Songs hummed under their breath, words in a language that felt like flowing water. Though he couldn't understand, he found himself humming along. Each evening, when the sun slipped behind pines, the cabin filled with the soft glow of the fire and the faint murmur of conversation, Lynn's voice grew stronger. She began to ask about the land, the trails, the faces carved into the mountains around them. Daniel told her winters harsher than this one, of wolves that used to prowl near the stream, of the small grave behind the ridge that held his wife. He didn't linger on that part, but Lynn saw how his eyes dimmed when he spoke. She didn't press him. Instead, she offered a story of her own, a husband lost at a railroad, his name carved into a wooden cross no one visits. He built bridges for others to cross, she said, staring at the fire, but no one came back for me. Daniel didn't reply, but his jaw tightened. When she looked at him, she saw something flicker in his expression, not pity, but recognition. Two people left behind by a world that had no place for mercy. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things neither dared say aloud. As days stretched into weeks, the snow outside began to soften, sliding from the roof in heavy sheets. The sound of water dripping from the eaves became constant, but with the thaw came unease. One morning, while chopping wood behind the cabin, Daniel noticed boot prints leading from the tree line to his door. He froze, the axe still raised. The prints were fresh. Someone had been watching. He followed them only a short way before they vanished into the forest, swallowed by melting snow. When he returned, Lynn stood at the window, her face pale. She had seen them too. "Could be hunters," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Or not," she whispered. That night, the fire burned low, and no one slept easily. Every creak of the cabin made the children flinch. Daniel sat awake with his rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the door. When dawn came, nothing had happened, but the air inside felt thinner, as if the safety they had built was beginning to crack. Later that day, Lynn tried to distract the children by teaching them how to fold paper cranes from scraps of old newspaper. Daniel watched from the corner, the sound of their laughter unfamiliar but welcome. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that peace might hold. Yet even as he thought it, the memory of those footprints nagged at him. He stepped outside, scanning the horizon where the forest met the hills. The sky was too still, the birds too quiet. The wilderness, once a shield, now felt like a waiting mouth. That night, Lynn woke from a dream with a scream caught in her throat. She saw again the men, the torches, the whip. Daniel rushed to her side, gripping her shoulders gently. "It's all right," he murmured. "They ain't here." But her trembling didn't stop until she felt his arm around her. She didn't pull away. He stayed there, silent, until her breathing slowed. When she finally drifted back into sleep, he stared at the ceiling for a long time, the sound of her fragile breast breaking something open in him. In the following days, their closeness became unspoken. When Lynn moved around the cabin, he made space for her without words. When she cooked, he sat nearby, cleaning tools or whittling wood, pretending not to notice the way her presence eased the silence. Sometimes their hands brushed while passing a bowl or tending the fire. Neither spoke of it, but both felt the gravity of what was forming, something fragile, something undeserved. One afternoon, while fetching water from the creek, Daniel saw smoke in the distance, thin black, rising from the southern ridge. He crouched low, heart pounding. Through his spyglass, he caught sight of riders, 3, maybe 4, moving slowly toward the valley. His pulse quickened. He returned to the cabin at a run. Lynn was outside with the children, hanging laundry in the weak sun. When she saw his face, she didn't need to ask. "They've found us," she whispered. "Get inside," he said. He checked his rifle, loaded fresh cartridges, then looked toward the distant plume of smoke. "They won't stop," she said. "They never stop." He met her gaze, steady and cold. "Then we don't run." The children huddled near the hearth as night fell. Daniel reinforced the door with planks, set traps outside the windows, and extinguished the lamps until only the faintest glow of the fire remained. The cabin that felt like refuge now felt like a fort. Lynn sat beside him, hands clasped tight, her eyes reflecting the flames. "You could have left us," she said quietly. "Would have been easier." He looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe," he said, voice rough, "but easy don't mean right." The wind rose again, whispering through the cracks, carrying distant sounds. Hooves, faint but growing closer. Lynn took his hand without thinking. Outside, the forest shivered under the cold moonlight. Inside, two souls who had lost everything waited for the storm to return. And when it did, it would find them standing side by side. The storm broke over the mountains with a roar that swallowed every cry. Snow fell thick and fast, blurring the shapes of men on horseback as the mountain man urged his mare forward through the white fury. In his cabin behind him, the woman and her 3 children huddled near the hearth, the warmth of the fire licking at their frozen skin. She could still feel the sting of the whip on her back, the memory branded deeper than the bruises. Her youngest clung to her skirts, whispering questions she couldn't answer. Why they hated them, why they were called names for being Chinese, why good people had to hide. She pressed a trembling hand to his cheek and said nothing. Outside, the wind moaned like an old ghost. By dawn, the storm eased, revealing a land reborn in silence. The mountain man returned, his coat torn, eyes fierce from what he'd seen. 3 men dead in the drift, their weapons half buried. He said nothing, only checked the fire, fed the horses, then knelt beside her. He cleaned the reopened wounds across her shoulders with the gentleness of a man who knew pain's language. "They won't come again," he said finally. She watched his hands, strong yet uncertain, and something within her, something buried beneath years of humiliation and fear, stirred faintly like spring under frost. Days passed in the cabin, the rhythm of survival replacing the chaos of fear. The children learned to fetch water from the creek, their laughter tentatively returning. The woman began to cook again, her quiet skill turning meager supplies into warmth and comfort. Each night, as the logs crackled, the mountain man sat a few feet away, never too close, never too far. Sometimes he spoke about the land, about wolves and winters past, about how loneliness can turn a man hollow. She listened, her heart tightening at the edges of his solitude, sensing that he, too, carried ghosts not easily named. One evening, as twilight painted the peaks in bruised gold, she found him mending the roof, his silhouette against the bleeding sky. She climbed up beside him, her hands clumsy with the nails but steady in purpose. "You don't have to fix everything alone," she said softly. He looked at her then, and the world seemed to pause. The hum of crickets, the whisper of pine, even the ache in the air between them. "I reckon I don't," he murmured. It wasn't love yet, but it was the beginning of belonging, the rarest thing either had ever known. Spring thawed the valley slowly, bringing new dangers with the melting snow. Word spread of bounty hunters roaming through, paid to punish those who harbored undesirables. One morning, hoofbeats echoed again to the canyon, too deliberate to be travelers. The mountain man's expression hardened. He moved the woman and children into the cellar, pressed his rifle into her hands, and whispered, "If I don't come back, take them north. Follow the river." She shook her head violently, tears glistening. "You brought us home," she said. "We'll not lose you now." But he was already gone, striding into the storm of men and gunpowder. The fight was fast and brutal, the kind only the frontier knew. The bounty hunters came 5 strong, guns gleaming under the noonday glare. He took cover behind the corral, firing, reloading, moving like a shadow through smoke. The woman could hear the echoes above the cellar, each shot a heartbeat closer to silence. When she could stand it no longer, she climbed out, rifle trembling in her grip. The yard was chaos. 2 men down, one crawling, another aiming from behind the trough. She raised a gun, breath shallow, and fired. The man fell backward into the mud. When it was over, the mountain man stood bleeding beside the barn, his breath ragged but steady. She ran to him, pressed her hands to the wound in his side, whispering prayers in a language he didn't know. "You're safe now," he rasped. She shook her head. "No, we're safe." He smiled faintly through the pain, his hand finding hers. Then it was worth it. That night, under a sky clear enough to see eternity, she tended his wounds beside the fire. The children slept near the hearth, faces peaceful for the first time in months. He dozed, feverish but alive, murmuring her name once in his sleep. She sat watching him, realizing how much he had risked, not just his life, but his solitude, the one thing a man of the wild guards most fiercely. She reached out, brushed his hair from his brow, and whispered, "No more running, no more hiding. We stay." By summer, the valley bloomed with wildflowers. The cabin was repaired, the corral filled with new foals, laughter echoing where once there had been only silence. The woman walked with straighter spine now, the scars on her back fading into stories rather than reminders. The children played in the creek, while the mountain man worked the fence, glancing up each time her voice carried on the wind. There were no promises spoken between them, no vows, but when he placed a carved wooden bird in her palm one morning, she understood. It was freedom, and it was home. Years later, travelers passing to would speak of them. The reclusive mountain family that took no sides, harmed no one, yet welcomed the loss of food and shelter. Some said the woman had once been a slave. Others whispered she was an angel who fell into the snow and was saved by a man who'd forgotten how to live. The truth, as it often is, lived quietly between them, in the children's laughter, in the scent of cedar smoke, in the way he always left one chair empty by the fire for whoever still wandered cold and alone. And if you listen close, they say, on winter nights when the wind howls the pines, you can still hear her voice, soft, strong, and full of grace, telling the tale by the firelight, how a man who said no more turned strangers into a family, and how love, even beaten and buried, found its way home again.